Welcome to Quiet Scare, where horror doesn't scream, it whispers. These are real, documented experiences, carefully curated and adapted to keep the facts clear and the atmosphere calm enough for sleep. Please like and subscribe and tap the bell to catch each new episode. No more than 3 ads in the first 15 minutes, then a clean run to the end. Quiet documentary true narration with a literary edge for sophisticated listeners. Sleep well and dream dark. It started with that deep, twisting ache in my gut, the kind that builds pressure by the mile until you're scanning every exit for a sign with the word restroom. I was halfway through a long overnight drive, somewhere between Amarillo and nowhere, when I finally spotted the glowing blue logo, a public rest area. I pulled in without thinking twice, the rain blurring my headlights and bouncing off the windshield like handfuls of thrown gravel. There were no other cars, not in the lot, not on the highway behind me, just the skeletal glow of overhead sodium lights and the squat concrete restroom building in the center. I parked as close as I could and made a mad dash across the slick pavement, one hand on my stomach and the other shielding my face. Rain soaked through my hoodie in seconds. Inside, the bathroom smelled like bleach and cold tile. One flickering bulb buzzed overhead, casting hard shadows. The stalls were all empty. I picked the cleanest one and sat down hard, grateful just to be off my feet for a second. The sound of the rain outside was muffled by the cinderblock walls, but I could still hear it tapping through a narrow window above the sinks. I wasn't in there long, maybe a few minutes, when the main door creaked open. Wet footsteps scuffed across the floor. Whoever it was, they didn't head to a urinal or another stall. They just stood there right outside mine. At first, I thought maybe they were waiting, but the stall next to mine was empty. So was the one on the other end. There was no reason to stand so close. I cleared my throat, no response. Just a low shuffle of feet, like a weight shifting from one leg to the other. Then came a noise. A deep metallic clatter, something shifting sharply behind me, like a pipe twitching or a vent grate falling. I jerked upright, heart racing. The footsteps surged forward, and suddenly the stall door buckled under a massive hit. The whole frame rattled. Then again, harder. The lock vibrated in its latch as the person began pounding. Open palm slaps that turned into full-on shakes like they were trying to rip the door off. I shouted, told them someone was in here, that it wasn't funny, but they didn't speak. They just kept rattling it with those violent, deliberate bursts. And then they stopped. No footsteps, no breathing, just silence, except for the muted patter of the rain outside. I waited, ears straining, when I finally dared to lean down and peek under the stall. No one was there. Just a few dirty water footprints, already drying. I opened the door slowly. The bathroom looked exactly the same, except for the mirror. Written in thick wet streaks across the glass were the words, "See you outside." My chest locked. I wiped my hand over the message and felt the damp trail where fingers had dragged through steam, or maybe rain. I didn't care which. I bolted. Outside, the rain had picked up to a sheet. I ran flat out toward my car, the soles of my shoes slipping on the painted lines. Behind me, I heard it. Heavy steps, slapping through puddles, closing the gap fast. I didn't look. I couldn't. I slammed the door shut, turned the key, and yanked the gear into drive. As I peeled out of the lot, tires screeching, I glanced into the rearview mirror. There was a man standing at the edge of the lot, massive, still as stone, rain dripping off his shoulders like he didn't even notice it. It started with rain, the kind that stains your jeans from the knees down and makes everything smell like wet concrete and pine needles. I was halfway across the quad, hoodie soaked through, when I first noticed her watching me. We'd shared a class Modern British Lit, I think, but I only remembered her name because it showed up in my inbox later that evening. "Good seeing you today," it said, even though we hadn't spoken. "Let's grab lunch sometime. Rainy days make for good conversations." I didn't think much of it. People were friendly at university. We got lunch once. She was quiet but enthusiastic about books, dreams of writing, the feeling of belonging somewhere she hadn't found yet. She'd nod while I talked, eyes a bit too focused, like she was recording every word. It rained again that day, and she joked that maybe we were meant to be rain friends. I laughed politely and forgot about it, but she didn't. We met for lunch 3 more times. Each time she brought up things I'd only mentioned in passing. My favorite childhood snack, the nickname my mother gave me, the book I said changed my life. On the 4th lunch, she reached across the table and touched my hand. She said it felt like fate, like maybe we had a deeper connection than just schoolmates. I pulled away, told her gently that I didn't see her that way. After that, she stopped showing up. I figured she was embarrassed, maybe hurt, and I let it fade. The term ended. I moved on. Years passed. It was my partner James who found the blog. He was helping me put together a teaching portfolio, and Googled my name to check what was public. Buried on the 5th or 6th page of results was a link to a site I didn't recognize, ourotherlife.tumblr.com. The banner was a blurry photo of rain hitting a cafe window. The first post was dated a week after our last lunch, a long poetic paragraph about the moment our souls touched, across a rainy campus, and how the author had found, in me, the second half of their life. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes without scrolling, but James did. Hundreds of posts, long diary-like entries, photos I never knew were taken, me walking to class, laughing with friends, sitting in the library. She had named me, but not really. She called me M, which was close enough. She wrote about our dates, those lunches, as though they were romantic. She reframed the moment I pulled my hand away as the day M denied their truth. The blog split me into 2 people, M, the soulmate, and Mira, a fictional best friend meant to protect M from reality. The disturbing part wasn't the obsession, it was how she'd rewritten my life to suit her fantasy. She wrote about James with venom, calling him a parasite, accusing him of brainwashing me. There were Photoshop edits of me alone, with him blurred out. There were imagined conversations between Mira and M, where Mira urged me to leave him. I shut the laptop and cried. James wanted to confront her, but I said no. She hadn't contacted me. The blog didn't even have my real name. I told myself that if we ignored it, it would stop. But it didn't. Over the next year, 2 of my friends mentioned that she'd reached out. She was charming, flattering. She told one of them she felt deeply connected to James and wanted to get to know him. She emailed a professor of mine asking about a collaboration we'd supposedly discussed. When they didn't respond, she posted about how the world was full of gatekeepers and liars. I blocked the site. I tried to move on. Then, 5 years after I graduated, I got a message on Facebook from an unfamiliar account. The profile picture was rain hitting pavement. The message said, "I miss being us." Attached was a photo of my childhood home taken from the street on a rainy day. She had started writing in my voice. She narrated our shared life as if she were me. She described memories that weren't hers. My grandmother's funeral, my first kiss, the night I found out my parents were divorcing. She posted them as if they were hers. She responded to comments in character, thanking people for their support during a hard time. I changed all my passwords. I called friends to warn them. I had to explain everything, this invisible tether I never asked for. Then came the job interview. I'd applied for a faculty position. I was a finalist, and then I wasn't. The department head sent me a polite, vague rejection. A week later, a friend inside the program forwarded me an anonymous email someone had sent to the hiring committee. It contained screenshots from the blog, painting me as unstable, unethical, deeply involved in a parasocial fantasy life. The timestamps were all recent. I never got to defend myself. The blog was gone by then, vanished. But the damage had already spread, quietly, like mold under wallpaper. Last spring, it rained for a week straight, the kind of rain that feels like it's leaking from your bones. I was curled on the couch, watching it stream down the window, when my phone buzzed. A friend request. Her name, her photo, A new account, no message, just her face, older now, but still smiling like she knew something I didn't. I stared at the screen until it went black. I didn't accept, I didn't report it. I just sat there, listening to the rain and wondering if it would ever stop. It had been raining since early morning, that steady, needling kind of rain that coated the windows in a gray blur and soaked the gravel drive into mush. I remember the smell of wet earth and pine when we first arrived. Mom driving, Aunt Carly in the passenger seat, and me squished in the back beside bags of cleaning supplies and groceries. The plan was simple, spring cleaning at Grandma's house. She'd had hip surgery the month before and couldn't do much on her own yet. Grandma's place was out in the sticks. Miles of dirt road, nothing but trees and fence line, and the nearest neighbor a 10-minute drive away. I'd always liked it there. It felt old and quiet, like the world forgot it existed. That day the rain just made everything quieter. No birds, no bugs, just water tapping the porch roof and the occasional groan of the trees. While the adults got to work, I went out back with my cousins Emily and Max. We weren't allowed to track mud inside, so we wore socks indoors, shoes off at the door. Eventually, the three of us got bored and wandered out to the car. It was one of those moments with no real reason behind it. We just felt like checking it out. Emily climbed in the front seat. Max started digging around the back floorboards, and I poked around under the seats. We didn't find anything interesting, and after a minute or two, Emily slammed the passenger door closed, hard enough to shake the frame. We ran back inside. Dripping, Aunt Carly fussed at us for leaving wet footprints on the tile, so we took turns toweling off by the laundry room. That was when Mom asked if any of us had seen her purse. She always kept it in the corner of the kitchen counter next to the bread box, but now it was open and pushed slightly out of place. She pulled out her wallet and started flipping through the compartments. "There was 100 in here," she muttered. "Two 50s. I put them in yesterday." Nobody said anything. Grandma, who had been dozing in her recliner with the TV playing low, looked over her glasses and asked what was wrong. "Nothing," Mom said too quickly. "Just cleaning." We were sent to the living room after that. Cartoons were put on. Rain still tapped the windows. I remember how it sounded on the metal chimney, sharp and hollow like someone dropping coins into a pipe. About 20 minutes later, Aunt Carly walked through the kitchen on her way to the laundry room and stopped dead. "Did one of you kids go back outside?" We all said no. She looked out the window over the sink and frowned. "The car door's wide open." Mom came in to look. "I told them not to slam it," she muttered. "Guess they didn't latch it all the way." But when she went out to close it, something made her stop halfway down the porch steps. I watched from the window. She turned her head slowly, scanning the tree line, then took a step forward like she was trying to listen. Her arms stayed close to her sides. When she came back in, her jacket was soaked, and her face was stiff. "I think someone's been around," she said in a low voice. "I saw tracks coming around the side of the house. Could have been old, but they didn't look like ours." She didn't want to panic Grandma, so she played it off, and made a show of locking the doors. We weren't allowed outside anymore. An hour passed. Rain kept falling. The smell of cleaner filled the kitchen. I was sitting cross-legged by the coffee table, trying to draw in my notebook when the phone rang. Not Mom's cell, not Grandma's either. The landline. It was one of those clunky beige wall phones with the long cord. Aunt Carly picked it up, then went still. She didn't say hello again, just stood there. Then she hung up. "What was that?" Mom asked from the hallway. Aunt Carly turned slowly. "They said, 'I know you're in there.'" The house went dead quiet. Grandma sat up straighter. "What?" They didn't say who they were. Didn't ask for anybody. Just that. We locked every door and window, even the ones upstairs. Then Mom called the sheriff's office from her cell. They said someone would come by. We all huddled in the living room, waiting. The only light came from a table lamp and the TV flickering low. I kept looking out the window even though I didn't want to. Something about the trees felt wrong, too still. That's when I saw it smoke. Smoke. Just a wisp at first, curling up behind the garage. I blinked, leaned closer, and saw it again. Thin and gray, lifting in the rain. "There's smoke," I said, pointing. The adults moved fast. Aunt Carly grabbed the fire extinguisher. Mom and the officer he just pulled up, perfect timing, ran outside. But when they got back there was nothing. No fire, no smoke, not even the smell. The officer walked the whole perimeter twice, said the rain would have smothered anything quick anyway, but there were no signs of burning, nothing warm to the touch, no blackened grass or scorched leaves. He stayed for another half hour, made a report, then left with a promise to patrol the road again later. We didn't stay long after that. Mom said she'd come back to finish cleaning another time. The next morning, when the rain finally stopped, we saw new footprints in the mud behind the garage. They didn't match our shoes. No one ever found the missing money. The phone call was never traced. And no one ever figured out where the smoke came from or why it disappeared the second someone went looking for it. It wasn't pouring when it started, just that light kind of drizzle that clings to your hair and skin, makes the forest smell sharper, like wet bark and moss. My stepmom used to hike a lot before she met my dad. She'd go with her best friend Haley. This was back in the early 90s when teenagers had a little more freedom and way less sense. They were both 17, and they'd parked at a trailhead that wound up through some forested hills outside a small mountain town. Not a national park, nothing monitored, just a network of unofficial trails used by hunters, stoners, and the occasional backpacker. The plan was a 2-hour loop back before dark. The trail was mostly dry at the start, but the weather shifted fast. Mist rolled in, thick enough that the outlines of trees began to blur. They hadn't brought rain gear, just hoodies and a single half-empty water bottle. About halfway in, the drizzle turned to rain. They decided to cut through a side trail that supposedly led back to the road, but after half an hour of downhill switchbacks, they weren't sure they were even heading the right way. The rain had soaked through their shoes, and mud clung to their jeans. When they hit a gravel service road, it felt like salvation. That's when they heard the truck. It was an old Ford, green or brown, hard to tell through the streaks of mud. It pulled up slow. A man leaned over from the driver's seat. He looked to be in his 30s, unshaven, with friendly eyes and one of those slow, easy smiles. Said he was heading back toward the parking lot. Asked if they wanted a ride out of the rain. They hesitated, but the road ahead was long, and they were cold, wet, and tired. So they got in. The cab smelled like old tobacco and rain-soaked leather. The man asked their names but didn't give his. Just kept smiling, making small talk about the weather, the trails. My stepmom said he had this way of speaking that was calm, almost too calm, like nothing in the world could make him angry. At first it seemed like they were heading in the right direction, but then he veered off onto a smaller path, just a rutted, overgrown track leading deeper into the woods. He told them not to worry, that this was a shortcut. Then he said, "Don't get out. Whatever you do, just stay in the truck." No smile this time. They glanced at each other. My stepmom touched Haley's knee under the dash. Neither of them spoke. The truck slowed in front of a shack. Tiny, wooden, almost invisible in the trees. No windows, just a single door, slightly ajar. The man cut the engine and stepped out without another word. Rain drummed on the roof. They sat in silence, the cab fogging up from their breath. That's when my stepmom noticed the stuff in the back seat. A coil of rope, 2 unopened boxes of industrial plastic wrap, and tucked beside them a small hatchet, the edge stained with something dark that had dried to a reddish-brown crust. Neither of them said anything. Haley just stared straight ahead. The shack door creaked. The man hadn't come back yet. They didn't wait. My stepmom yanked the handle and pushed the door open. They bolted straight into the woods, away from the track, splashing through underbrush and ferns, slipping on wet leaves. They ran until they couldn't hear the truck, couldn't see anything but trees and fog. Eventually, they found the trail again. Took them another hour to hike back to the parking lot. It was nearly dark by then. The lot was empty, except for one vehicle. The truck. It was parked 3 spaces from their car. They dropped flat behind a berm of bushes and didn't move. Rain had softened to mist again. From where they hid, they could see the driver's side of their own car. Nothing moved. They waited. An hour passed. Then 2. Just as they started to think he'd given up, the back door of their car opened. He climbed out slowly, stretched his back like he'd been cramped for a while, then walked to his truck and drove away without turning on his headlights. They stayed hidden for another half hour before daring to approach their car. Inside, the back seat was dry, except for a faint smudge on the fabric. The dome light flickered when they opened the door. My stepmom doesn't like to talk about it much. She never told her parents, never reported anything, says she couldn't sleep for weeks after, and to this day she always checks the back seat before getting into her car, rain or shine. The rain had been falling for hours by the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, each drop pinging off the hood like a slow drumbeat. My wipers struggled to keep up. The house, more of a cabin really, sat at the edge of the woods, tucked so far up the mountain that my phone had flickered in and out of service 3 times on the way there. No neighbors, no lights, just trees crowding the road and the faint smell of damp pine. The kids met me at the door in mismatched pajamas. Tyler was 8, his little sister June was 6, and the toddler Sammy was already chewing on a plastic truck in the corner. Their dad, my uncle, had left a scribbled note on the counter and sped off 10 minutes before I arrived. I'd babysat for them a few times before, but never out here. They'd just moved in, something about getting away from town, starting fresh. The power flickered around 9:30. Just a single blip, but it made all the kids jump. I lit a candle in the kitchen just in case. Sammy had already fallen asleep on the couch and I was trying to coax the others into brushing their teeth when I heard it gravel shifting, tires crunching wet stone somewhere behind the house. I moved to the kitchen window and saw headlights bleeding through the trees. Slow and cautious, not on the main driveway. These lights were approaching from the side, where a long-forgotten dirt track led down to the basement's old access point. The rain distorted everything. The windows were fogged. I could just make out the shape of a truck. Boxy, older, no license plate on the front. It stopped. No one was supposed to come from that side. I told the kids to stay in the living room and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see what I could. For a minute, nothing moved. Then I heard it, metal rattling. Not tapping, not knocking. Someone was shaking the garage door below us, hard enough to make it echo through the floorboards. A second later, I heard the doorknob to the basement stairwell jiggle twice, 3 times. Then nothing. The rain made everything louder and quieter at the same time. It drowned out background noise, but every sharp sound felt amplified. I stepped back, heart hammering, and dug my phone out of my bag. 1 bar, maybe 2. I dialed 911 and prayed it would go through. The operator's voice cut in and out as I whispered what I knew. Isolated cabin. Someone's trying to get in through the basement. 3 kids here, no weapons. Please send someone. I crouched low near the counter, trying to keep my voice steady. The operator kept saying they were tracing the call, that help was on the way. I couldn't tell if she heard everything, but I stayed on the line. Then Tyler called out from the living room. "There's someone at the glass door." I rushed over. The curtains were open. Rain streaked the glass like veins, warping the image, but not enough. A man was standing there, maybe 30, maybe 40, soaked to the bone but grinning like he was amused, like he knew something we didn't. Behind him, a second man stood just at the edge of the patio light, half-shadowed and still. I froze. Tyler stepped beside me and his face went pale. "That's one of Dad's friends," he whispered. "From before, when he was in trouble." My stomach dropped. The man at the door cupped his hands against the glass, peering in, scanning the room like he was window shopping. I held up the phone so he could see the screen and yelled, "I'm on the phone with the police. They're coming right now." For a moment, he didn't move. Then he leaned back, grinned wider, and stepped away. Both men vanished into the rain, swallowed by the dark. We didn't move from that spot until the police arrived nearly 40 minutes later. They searched the property, found tire tracks that curved down behind the shed, but no truck, no footprints washed away by the rain. The officer said the driveway they used hadn't been driven on in years. Probably someone who knew the property, someone who knew how to approach without being seen. When my uncle came back, he didn't ask many questions, just clenched his jaw, muttered something about people from his past, and told the cops we must have mistaken it, that it was probably nothing. But when he turned to get the kids, I saw the look on his face, anger, sure, but fear too, recognition. I never babysat there again. Even now, when it rains hard at night and I catch movement near the windows, my heart starts racing. I think about the man's grin, the way he watched us through the glass like we were already hit. It was one of those bright, dry afternoons where the sky looked fake. Too blue, too clean. Everything should have felt normal, but it didn't. That house never let me feel normal. From the day we moved in, it had pressed on my chest in a way I couldn't explain. Like the air itself was off. Too heavy. Too quiet. My parents brushed it off as the stress of the move. But I wasn't the only one. Even our dog had stopped going into the kitchen. That day, I got home from school early. I remember pushing open the front door and instantly feeling like I shouldn't be there. The house was still, too still. My parents weren't supposed to be home yet. Dad's shift ran late, and Mom wouldn't be off until 6. But as I stepped inside, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Not just voices, arguing. At first I felt a flash of relief. Maybe plans had changed. Maybe someone got off early. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the tone was sharp. My dad's voice low and tight. My mom's sharper, familiar. That's what made it worse. I stepped toward the hallway. "Hello?" I called out. The voices stopped. Just stopped. Not a door closing. No footsteps. Just silence. Then a voice called back. It was my mother's voice, but wrong. Flat. Like someone reading from a bad script. Like a recording that had been played too many times. "In here, sweetie." Every hair on my arm stood up. Something primal in me kicked in. "Get out." I turned and grabbed the front doorknob, my hands slick with sweat. I was halfway down the porch steps when I looked back. She was in the window, my mother's face, staring out through the kitchen glass. But it wasn't her. Her skin looked too pale, the eyes wide and blank, not looking at me, not at anything, just staring, as if the face itself wasn't connected to a person behind it. And it didn't blink. I ran, not just down the street. I sprinted all the way to my mom's workplace 3 blocks away. I must have looked insane, showing up sweaty, babbling. But the moment I actually saw her, working at her desk, confused to see me, something inside me caved in. Relief and fear mixed into something cold. She hadn't left work all day. We didn't go back to the house that night, or the next. My dad went in once, with a friend, to grab essentials. He didn't say what he felt, just that we needed to start packing. We broke the lease 2 weeks later and never looked back. No one ever explained what I saw. No one tried, and I never stepped foot in that kitchen again. But I still remember that face at the window. It was a Friday night just after the last bell of the school week, and all I wanted was something that didn't feel like the inside of a textbook. Trevor had the idea, said he knew a place way out past the grain silos, just off a dirt road that barely showed up on GPS. The farmhouse had been empty for decades, he claimed. Local legend said the owners just vanished one night, left everything behind. We didn't believe the ghost stories, but the idea of exploring a forgotten house with everything still in it, That had its own draw. We were urban explorers more or less, or we like to think of ourselves that way. Phone lights, cheap boots, backpacks with snacks, and backup batteries. It had been clear all day, but by the time we pulled up to the fence line, the sky had turned. Wind pushed the tree branches sideways and the first dots of rain hit the windshield. Trevor didn't hesitate. He was already hopping the fence while the rest of us climbed out of the car. Hoodies pulled up against the drizzle. There were 6 of us total. I was second over the fence, boots slipping on the wet wood. By the time we reached the porch, the rain had picked up, rattling down in sheets. The house didn't look like it belonged to the land anymore. Paint peeled in long strips from the siding. The windows were dark, but not broken. The front door creaked open on the first try. No key, no lock, just a long groan and the smell of mildew. Inside, it was like someone had pressed pause in the middle of life. A long dining table sat fully set plates, glasses, even napkins folded next to forks. Dust clung to everything, but not thick, just enough to blur the edges. The fridge stood closed in the corner of the kitchen. Trevor opened it, immediately gagged, and slammed it shut. Something inside had long since liquefied. The closets were still full. Dresses on wire hangers, men's jackets with stiff shoulders, shoes lined neatly at the bottom. One room had a child's bed, a single sock crumpled on the floor. The rain kept pouring, now so loud it muffled our voices. It made the whole house feel sealed in, like we were inside a drum. We moved upstairs slowly, creaking steps announcing each footfall. At the top, the hallway split left and right. I went right with 2 others. Trevor and Lena went left. Not even a minute later, we heard them scream, a sudden raw yell that cut through everything. We ran, 3 of us crashing into each other in the narrow hall, boots thudding on warped boards, flashlight beams jerking back and forth. They were standing frozen in the doorway of the far bedroom. Lena's hand was over her mouth. Trevor's face had gone pale. I stepped past them into the room. The bed was neatly made, floral quilt, lace-edged pillows, and in the center, propped up with perfect care, was a porcelain doll the size of a grown woman. Its body was stiffly posed under the covers. One arm rested on the blanket. Its head was tilted slightly to the side. Porcelain face turned to stare directly at the doorway. The eyes were glass, black in the dim light. The lips were painted in a small, deliberate smile. No one spoke. The only sound was the rain, relentless on the roof, and the occasional drip from somewhere in the attic. We backed away. None of us turned our backs on the bed. It wasn't just that the doll was there, it was that it had been placed that way. Staged, intentionally, like someone had taken their time to arrange it, carefully, right before leaving everything else behind. Trevor whispered something about getting out. No one argued. We moved fast down the stairs, nearly slipping on the wet wood. The front door slammed open under the wind, and we bolted for the car, soaked instantly. No one spoke until we were halfway back to the main road. The house hadn't been looted, nothing vandalized, no signs of squatters or animals. Just that doll lying in wait on a bed that hadn't been slept in for who knows how long. I still think about the way its eyes caught the light when we entered the room. We were chasing quiet. That's the best way I can explain it. The kind of quiet that only exists after midnight, in places people forget. No traffic, no lights, just your wheels under you and the dark at your back. My best friend Tyler and I had found this path in the wilderness preserve, a paved track the maintenance crew used, that snaked through dense woods long abandoned. It didn't show up on maps. We'd found it during the day once, carved into the hills like a hidden ribbon, and decided to come back that night to ride it alone. No street lamps, no houses, just pavement, trees, and the sound of bearings humming underfoot. It had been raining earlier that day, just a soft, steady drizzle that left everything wet and glossy. The mist still clung to the low branches, thick in the hollows, and the pavement was slick. We didn't care. That only made the ride feel smoother, like gliding through another world. The clouds had started to break overhead, and now the moon was showing through in places, smudged silver through the canopy. We were halfway through our second run when I noticed it. Just a pinprick of light way down the path, past where the trail curved and dropped into a little valley. At first I thought it was a phone screen, or maybe a hiker's headlamp, but it didn't move, just hovered there, faint and yellow like a candle in fog. Tyler saw it too. We slowed without speaking, coasting to a stop under a cluster of leaning pines. It was quiet, too quiet, in retrospect. No night insects, no wind, not even our boards ticking against the wet asphalt. Just that light, and then it exploded. I don't mean literally. It just changed. 1 second it was a flicker. The next it became 4 or 5 searing beams, cutting through the dark, blinding in their suddenness. At the same time came the sound. Roaring, riving, engines, multiple engines, screaming to life like they'd been waiting. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like I'd stepped off a cliff. Tyler grabbed my arm and yanked me off the path. We stumbled uphill into the brush, tripping over roots and wet stone, not even trying to be quiet. I remember the feel of the wet leaves slapping my face, the cold sting of brambles scraping my wrists. Behind us, tires screeched. Someone yelled just one word, sharp and fast. Go. They were coming. The only place we could find was this old dugout tucked into the hillside, overgrown with ferns and half collapsed. It might have been part of some old fire break or maintenance trench, but it was deep enough to crouch in. We slid in and didn't speak, just knelt in the mud, trying to control our breathing, while the roar of engines echoed closer. They stopped right where we'd been. I peeked up, just enough to see over the rise. There were 4 of them, 2 ATVs and 2 dirt bikes. All of them were masked or helmeted, impossible to tell age or expression. One of the ATV guys stood up and shouted into the woods, "Find them." That was when the lights split. They fanned out, each one taking a different direction up the path into the trees, circling wide. It wasn't random, they were coordinated like this wasn't the first time they'd done this. We couldn't stay. We slid further downslope, staying low, hearts pounding. Every time one of the bikes buzzed near, we dropped and held still. At one point, one of them passed within 15 feet, sweeping a flashlight side to side. I could smell the gas, see the shine on his jacket. I didn't breathe until the sound faded again. Eventually, we hit a shallow creek that marked the edge of the preserve. On the other side was a service road, barely lit by a distant streetlight. Civilization. I used my phone, hands shaking, to call our friend Emily. I couldn't explain. Just told her where to meet us and begged her to hurry. She pulled up 10 minutes later, headlights off, doors unlocked. We didn't say anything until we were halfway back to town. Tyler finally broke the silence. They were waiting. I didn't answer, but I knew he was right. That light just one at first was bait. We never found out who they were or why they chased us. Maybe they were just messing around. Maybe not, but we never went back. Not to that path, not even in daylight. We stick to streets now, the kind with lights, cars, and people. Safer that way. The rain was steady, not heavy but persistent enough to soak the cuffs of my jeans and beat up on the brim of my cap. The kind of weather that dulls sound and makes the world feel distant, hushed under the patter. We'd parked off an old gravel road and hiked half a mile through overgrown brush to reach the place. I'd been there once before, alone, just scouting, but something about the 2-story farmhouse with its split roofline and moss-slick siding had pulled me back. This time I brought Cam with me. He wasn't thrilled about it. Kept looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to come charging out of the woods. But I told him the place was empty, had been for years. He didn't argue much, just zipped his hoodie up to his chin and followed me to the backside of the house where the cellar door lay half off its hinges. It was warped and spongy with age. One good yank and it swung open, revealing the concrete steps slick with algae and dark with rainwater pooling at the bottom. I clicked on my flashlight and went first, stepping carefully to avoid slipping. The air in the cellar hit like a wall, wet, sweet with rot, and somehow warmer than the air outside. Once inside, I paused to let my eyes adjust. The space was low-ceilinged and littered with broken furniture, cardboard boxes slumped with damp, and fragments of drywall scattered like leaves. A wide support beam ran down the middle, splitting the room into two murky halves. I lifted the beam of light and walked deeper. There was an old freezer in the corner, crusted with rust, and shelves lined with jars, too clouded to see through. As I turned, my face pushed into a spider web strung between a beam and a pipe. I jerked back instinctively and wiped at my cheek. The moment I brushed it away, I heard it. One step, a single clear footstep directly above us. Not a creak, not a groan of settling wood, but the shift of weight on old floorboards. Cam froze, mid-step. I looked at him, his mouth opened like he was about to say something, then shut again. I raised a hand to hush him, but he shook his head slowly, deliberately, and mouthed the words, "We need to go." He turned first, and I followed. I didn't ask questions. We bolted for the cellar steps, slipping slightly on the wet concrete. Cam got up first and reached back for me. As I grabbed his hand, he yanked hard and practically dragged me through the broken doorway. The cellar door thudded closed behind us, jostled by the wind. We didn't stop running until we were past the tray line and back on the trail. Only then did Cam stop, hands on his knees, breathing hard. Rain dripped from his nose and chin, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. I asked what he saw. Still staring at the ground, he said that when he looked back to pull me up, he saw bare feet, human, pale, standing flat at the bottom of the cellar, exactly where we'd been seconds earlier. They didn't move, didn't step forward, just stood there facing the door. Neither of us said much on the walk back. The rain had tapered off by then, leaving only the sound of water ticking from the leaves around us. But every time I blinked, I could see the cellar again, the beam of my flashlight, that old freezer, the sound of that footstep, and the spot where I'd wiped the web from my face. It had rained earlier that night, and the pavement still reflected whatever light could cut through the dark. The air smelled of wet asphalt and something else, like rot. I was standing outside my friend's apartment complex, half slumped against the brick wall near the front entrance, waiting for the Uber I'd called 10 minutes earlier. It was pushing 4 in the morning. My phone said 4:06. I couldn't stop yawning between swaying a little too much to look normal. I was way too drunk to be out there alone, and I knew it. I just kept checking my phone, bouncing between the app and the real world, trying to stay upright and alert. The apartment door had locked behind me with that loud mechanical click, and I didn't have the code to get back in. I'd pounded on it for a while, but nobody came. That's when the street started to feel different, quieter than it should be, like the air was listening. No cars, no people, just the hiss of water dripping from the overhangs, and the occasional hum of a passing streetlight trying not to die. Then headlights cut the corner, and a sedan rolled toward the curb. Right make, right color. It looked just like the one in the app. It slowed and stopped right in front of me. Engine idling low. The driver rolled the window down halfway and leaned across the seat. He didn't smile, didn't greet me, just said, "I'm your Uber driver." He looked wrong. That's the only way I can put it. Too alert for that hour, too clean for that area, and the way his eyes locked onto me made my chest tighten. It was like he'd already decided something about me, something bad. I took a step back and slurred out, "What's my name?" His expression snapped. No delay, no confusion. Just instant sharp anger. He barked something like, "Don't start that shut. Get in the car." Only louder. He wasn't asking. His hand slapped the side of the door like I was being difficult, like I owed him compliance. My stomach dropped, and every bit of the alcohol in me turned cold. I looked at the plate. It didn't match. I was too slow to do anything else. My brain just locked up. I was pinned in place, apartment door behind me, car in front, nowhere to go but sidewalk. I glanced up at the windows above, hoping someone was looking down. Nothing. No faces, no lights. Just the hum of that engine and the man inside staring me down, pissed now like I'd insulted him. Then a second set of headlights pulled in behind the first car. Same type of sedan. It even looked like the same color in the dim light, but cleaner, newer. My phone buzzed in my hand. The app said the car had arrived, and when I glanced at the plate, it matched perfectly. Without thinking, I bolted past the first car. My foot hit something slick, and I almost went down, but adrenaline caught me. I wrenched open the back door of the real Uber and threw myself in, slamming it shut behind me. I didn't even look back until we'd pulled away from the curb. The other sedan hadn't moved. The man was still sitting there in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead. I never reported it. I just wanted to forget it happened. But I think about that moment sometimes. How close it all came. How easy it would have been to make the wrong decision. If my phone had died, if I hadn't asked that question, if the real driver had been even a minute later. It was one of those rare nights where everything seemed to align. Crisp mountain air, the smell of smoke from the fire pit, and the quiet that only comes with true distance from anything resembling a city. I was home from college for fall break, the first visit since my parents had moved to their new house up in the Blue Ridge. No neighbors for miles, just thick woods that pressed right up to the backyard, and a narrow gravel road curling off the mountain like a question mark. My friend Nate had driven up to spend the weekend. He always liked the outdoors more than I did, and he was the one who suggested lighting the fire. We'd pulled 2 lawn chairs close to the pit, and were slowly rotating skewers of marshmallows, while the family dog Luther, a big black shepherd mix, lounged between us like a tired sentry. Every now and then he'd lift his head, sniff the air, then settle back down. It started to rain lightly, just a mist at first, and we almost didn't notice. The fire snapped and hissed as drops hit the logs. I remember turning my face upward, breathing in the pine and ozone, thinking how peaceful it was. Then, Luther stood up. Not just stood, his whole body tensed like a coiled spring. His ears flattened, his lips curled, and a low growl rolled out of his chest like distant thunder. It wasn't the bark of a bored dog or a false alarm. This was deep, primal, directed. He stared straight ahead, into the tree line maybe 30 yards beyond the yard's edge. It was fully dark by then, the kind of darkness that swallows shadows, and we could barely see beyond the firelight. I looked at Nate. His face mirrored mine, half curious, half alarmed. Nate grabbed the flashlight we'd used earlier to find firewood and clicked it on. He took a few steps toward the trees, sweeping the beam left and right. Then he froze, and I stood up, half expecting him to crack a joke, but his voice came back thin and tight. "There's a guy out there." I couldn't process what he meant right away. I walked over slowly, heart already picking up speed, and looked where he was pointing. The flashlight beam jittered as his hand trembled, but it landed on something. A man, standing half behind a tree just visible around the edge of the trunk. Drenched in the mist, unmoving, his shirt and pants were the same weird shade of forest green, like a set. His hair was matted to his head. His eyes, I could just make them out. Wide, focused, watching us. We both yelled at the same time and ran. Luther was already at the back door, barking like he was ready to tear through the wall. My dad met us in the kitchen as we burst inside, mud and rain and panic trailing behind. I didn't have words. I just pointed and tried to steady my breathing. Dad was already reaching for the shotgun he kept mounted over the mantel. Mom had the phone in her hand before we even said anything. I remember her standing by the sink, fingers dialing without looking, her other hand pressed against her chest. The next hour unfolded in slow bursts. First came the local deputy, blue lights flashing in the drive, then more, 3 cruisers, then 6, a K-9 unit. Eventually, a black SUV rolled in with state troopers inside. Then the helicopter, its spotlight flickering across the treetops like it was trying to peel the forest open. We were told to stay inside. They searched with dogs and infrared scopes. Nate and I watched from the living room window, the rain falling harder now, drumming steadily on the roof. Luther sat pressed against my leg, every muscle in his body still tight. A tall officer spoke to my parents around midnight. His tone shifted the air in the room. The man we saw fit the description of a prison escapee. A felon who'd broken out 2 days earlier from a medium security facility about 20 miles south. Green inmate uniform. Known to be violent, had evaded multiple containment efforts since his escape. They didn't find him that night, but they left a cruiser at the end of the driveway. A presence, the officer said, just in case. I didn't sleep. None of us did. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps on the porch. Every gust of wind against the glass made my chest tighten. He was caught 3 days later, cornered in an abandoned outbuilding 2 ridges over. He'd been living off whatever he could scavenge. No weapons on him, but he didn't come quietly. We never found out why he was at our house, whether he was just watching or planning something worse. The thought that chilled me more than anything was how long he might have been standing there before Luther saw him. It's raining again. Not the soft kind that taps like fingertips on the windows, but a dense, relentless downpour that swallows the city in white noise. I can't stand the sound of it anymore. It makes everything feel too quiet beneath it. The first time it happened, the rain had nothing to do with it. It was clear out, bright actually. I remember because the sunlight was catching dust in the hallway when I walked in from work. I kicked my shoes off without thinking, dropped my bag on the couch and went straight to the bedroom to change. I didn't lock the door. Again, I had this bad habit, just pushing it shut behind me like the building's front security was enough. My husband had texted earlier to say he'd be home late. I wasn't hungry yet, so I figured I'd just swap into something comfortable and maybe read a little in the closet where it was quiet. That was my spot. Not for clothes really, though it was a walk-in, but because it was small and still like a sensory reset. I was halfway through pulling on an old hoodie when I heard the door open. It wasn't loud, just a soft click and a sweep. My heart didn't even jump. I called out, "Hey!" That was fast, assuming maybe plans had changed. I stepped out of the closet and into the bedroom, waiting to hear his voice. Nothing. No footsteps. No bags rustling. No keys dropping into the dish by the door. I walked out into the hallway, then turned into the kitchen. That's where I saw him. A man was standing there, just standing, not looking through drawers or fumbling around, just staring right at me. I didn't recognize him. He wasn't sweaty or twitchy like someone high. He looked clean, calm. I told him to leave. I don't remember the words I used, but I know my voice was steady. I pointed at the door. He didn't move. Instead, without taking his eyes off me, he walked over to the counter where I'd left my stuff. Phone, keys, wallet. He picked them up deliberate, like he'd done this before, and slipped them into his pockets one by one. That's when my body kicked in. Not to fight, not to scream. I turned and ran. I grabbed my laptop off the side table on instinct and sprinted back into the bedroom, then into the closet. There was a second door inside, one I rarely closed, but I slammed it now and locked it, then locked the closet behind me too. 2 doors between us. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the computer. I pulled up the messenger app and started typing. I didn't call the police. I don't know why. I think I was afraid the sound of my voice would give him a direction. I messaged my husband. He didn't reply. Then the first door cracked. A deep splintering pop, like a limb breaking. He was coming. The closet had no weapons. I didn't even look. I didn't scream. I sat on the floor with my back against the far wall, computer still open in my lap, and waited to die. The second door buckled. The knob shook. Wood creaked. My heartbeat sounded louder than the doorframe. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just watched the door and waited. I don't know how long it was, 10 seconds, maybe less, before I heard something else. A new crash. A voice, finally. Then another thud, heavier, like bodies hitting the ground. My husband had made it home. He tackled the guy in the hallway just as he got through the last door. The police didn't arrive for another 25 minutes. They took him away in cuffs. My husband had a split lip. I didn't have a scratch on me, just this blank, numb sense of shame. They asked me questions. What he looked like, what he said. I could barely remember. I was still sitting on the floor of the closet when they took photos of the broken doors, still holding the laptop in my lap like a shield. For weeks, I couldn't sleep unless every lock was double-checked twice. I kept rehearsing what I should have done, grabbed a lamp, slammed a drawer into his face. Done something. But I didn't. I froze. People don't like that part when I tell the story. They always say, well, you're safe now, that's what matters. But I know what they're thinking. That they would have fought back. That they would have screamed. That they wouldn't have let someone take their power like that. Eventually, I stopped telling the story. Instead, I started going to martial arts classes 3 times a week. At first, I couldn't even look people in the eye. Every loud noise made me tense, but I kept showing up. Now I can throw a decent punch. I can breathe through panic. I can stand in the mirror and not see a victim. But I still can't listen to the rain without locking the door twice and checking it again. It's just noise, I tell myself. Just water on the windows. The gravel driveway was already soft under my tires when I pulled up to the ranch house. Sky was overcast, air hanging thick with the kind of damp that told you rain was coming, whether you liked it or not. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, checked the address again, and trudged up the short walkway, boots crunching in the hush of the early afternoon. The front porch sagged slightly under my weight. There were 2 chairs, one covered in faded cushions, and a ceramic frog near the railing that someone had given googly eyes. The screen door creaked like it hadn't been used in a while. I knocked on the solid one, heard a distant "come on in," and stepped inside. His name was Ron, late 50s, oxygen tubing looped over his ears with a rust-red flannel shirt buttoned halfway over a white undershirt. His voice had the gravel of a longtime smoker, and his laugh when he offered me a seat was wet at the edges. But he was friendly, clearly lucid and eager to chat. I went through the normal spiel: health history, medications, how he'd been sleeping. The living room had that look of a place frozen in time. Old recliner, older carpet, heavy curtains drawn halfway open, but the light didn't reach far. I set up my laptop on a small side table while he kept talking about his old job in construction, some project out near the lake. That's when I felt it. A weight soft but deliberate settling over the top of my shoulders, like someone reading over my shoulder. I paused, fingertips resting on the keyboard. The sensation was subtle, not unpleasant exactly, just unmistakably there. And then, heavy footfalls behind me. Slow, measured, the unmistakable thud of work boots across carpet, crossing the room directly toward where I was sitting. I spun around. Nothing. No one. Just the closed hallway behind me and the windowless wall to my right. I looked back at Ron, who was grinning. Not a mean grin, not mocking, amused maybe, or expectant. "You're sensitive, huh?" he said, leaning forward with his forearms on his knees. "Yeah, he likes to check on new folks." I must have looked confused or worse, skeptical, because Ron let out that laugh again and waved a hand at the ceiling. "Don't worry," he said. "He's friendly. That's just Dave." I blinked. Dave. Yeah, my buddy. Lived here with me back in the day. Helped me build half this place, actually. Roof, framing, even the deck, though that's mostly rotted out now. He fell off the roof about 10 years back. Broke his neck on the stone path. The way he said it was casual. like he was telling me what kind of car Dave used to drive. I stared at him for a beat too long, then turned back to my laptop, pretending to focus on the health form while my heart tried to process what I'd just heard. Rain began to tap against the window behind me. Light at first, just a whisper. I kept typing, focused on inputting his oxygen settings and current medications, the small mundane things that kept my thoughts anchored, but the feeling of being watched grew heavier. It wasn't just a presence anymore. It was posture. I could feel where he would have stood, the angle of his shoulders, the way his head tilted down toward the screen. Breathing felt tight, like I had to push air past a filter that wasn't there. So I did what I do when I enter a home with a strong family dynamic, living or otherwise. I addressed him. Not out loud exactly, just under my breath, conversational, as if I were introducing myself to a particularly nosy uncle. I told him my name, told him I was there to help Ron, that I'd take good care of him, that I wasn't there to pry or change anything, just to make sure the guy could breathe easy and stay comfortable. The rain picked up, rapping harder against the glass. Thunder rolled in the distance. Then something kicked my chair. Hard. It wasn't a tap or a shift in balance. It was a full jolt, right against the back leg. I lurched forward, hands flying up from the keyboard. The whole chair slid maybe 2 inches, the kind of movement that happens when a toddler decides to play linebacker. I twisted around in shock. Nothing. Still nothing. I looked at Ron again. His grin was wider now, eyes sparkling like a kid who just watched his dog do a trick. "Told you," he said with a chuckle. "He screws with people, likes to see how folks react." The rain was coming down steady now, steady and strong, hammering the roof in irregular bursts. The living room seemed darker, even though I knew it was still early afternoon. I went back to my notes, made sure to keep my tone light, my pace steady. It helped to imagine Dave as just another one of Ron's visitors, like a neighbor stopping by, hanging out for the afternoon. Curious, a little pushy maybe, but not dangerous. I told Ron to call me if anything changed with his meds or his breathing. He nodded, grateful, and asked if I'd be back next week. I said yes. When I stood to leave, I could have sworn I felt a hand graze the back of my arm. Not a grip, just a touch, like someone saying goodbye. I didn't look back as I walked to the door, but the porch when I stepped onto it was soaked, rain coming in at a sideways slant. My car was wet, tires sinking just a little deeper into the soft earth. I didn't run, but I didn't linger either, and as I pulled away, windshield wipers squeaking to keep up, I caught a glimpse of the window next to the door, curtain still parted just enough for someone to watch me leave. I was already gripping the wheel too tight when the first truck pulled out in front of me. It was around 10 at night, and the rain had been coming down for hours. The kind that doesn't bounce but sheets across the windshield like someone tipping a bucket. My wipers were on full blast, but the view still came in jerky, distorted flashes like watching a bad VHS tape through smeared glass. I had just turned off the interstate onto a long stretch of state highway, one of those service roads that snakes through open farmland with nothing but fields and trees on either side. I had been driving home from a weekend with friends. I live alone in a one-bedroom place on the edge of town, and the road between here and there is usually quiet this time of night. I was just trying to make it back before the rain got worse. Then came the truck. It rolled out from a side road without warning. No signal, no hesitation. Just lurched into my lane like it owned the highway. I had to slam on the brakes so hard I felt the seatbelt bite into my chest. My tires slid for a second before catching grip, and the car rocked forward with a jolt. I honked out of reflex, but the truck didn't react. No tap of brake lights. It just kept rolling along slow as sludge. I waited for a gap in the next lane and pulled out to pass. As I drew even with the cab, I glanced up, couldn't see a face. Just the reflection of my own headlights cutting through the downpour, and the glint of wet chrome. Once I got ahead, I pushed it. eased back into my lane and tried to put distance between us, but the truck moved too. It drifted into my lane, then surged forward, headlights flaring in my rearview mirror. Then the high beams hit. The light flooded my cabin like a flashbang. I blinked and fumbled with the mirror, but even angling it didn't help. The truck was right on my bumper, less than a car length behind, and it wasn't backing off. Then came the horn. Long, sustained, too loud for that kind of weather. I changed lanes again. So did he. He matched every move I made. Left, right, slow, fast, always right there. Once when I tried to speed up, he gunned it too, riding close enough that I started to wonder if he was going to tap me on purpose. It wasn't until I cut across 2 lanes and took the next exit ramp that he finally broke off. His lights vanished in the side mirror, and I took a sharp breath. I didn't stop though. I kept driving, took a few side roads. I just wanted to throw him off and find another way home. I was still shaking, but part of me was already telling myself it was just some lunatic, some aggressive driver in the rain. Nothing more. I thought I was in the clear. About 15 minutes later, I merged back onto the highway, this time a different stretch, and tried to settle in again. The storm hadn't let up. If anything, the wind had picked up, making the rain come in sideways. Trees on either side of the road twisted like figures in a nightmare. I kept glancing at my mirrors. Nothing but blackness and rain shine. Until another truck pulled up behind me. It didn't start out strange. I barely registered it at first, just another set of lights in the distance. But it gained fast. When it got close enough, the horn erupted. Not just a warning honk. This one was deeper, more urgent. The kind of sound that makes your ribs shake. Then it veered. The truck drifted toward my lane. Not behind me, but beside. Its tires straddling the line like it was trying to nudge me off the road. There was no one else around. Just me. The dark and this wall of metal leaning into my lane like a bully in a school hallway. I slammed the gas and pulled in front of it, hoping it would back off. It didn't. I grabbed my phone. One hand on the wheel, the other tapping at the screen. Camera up. I angled it through the back window and started snapping pictures. That seemed to do something. The truck slowed. Its high beams went off. It fell back more than a few car lengths. I kept the phone recording as I moved over to the shoulder, hoping to get a clear shot of the license plate. It felt risky, but I needed something to show the cops if it came to that. I rolled to a stop under the glare of a highway light. My hazard blinkers lit up the rain like tiny strobe lights. The truck coasted to a stop behind me, about 20 feet back. Then through the blur of the rain in my rear view, I saw it. Something dark cut across the truck's headlights. A shape. Quick, low to the ground at first, then upright, like someone stepped down from the cab and moved toward my car. My fingers slipped off the phone. I couldn't see a face, just the movement, a blur that didn't make sense in how fast it cleared the space between us. I didn't wait to confirm anything. I threw the car into drive and peeled off the shoulder so fast the tires shrieked. My back end fishtailed before catching the road again. I didn't look back. I stayed on the road until I hit a gas station with lights and people. I parked under the awning, locked my doors, and sat there with my engine running. I checked the pictures. All of them were too blurred to make out a plate. The rain had smeared everything. I never saw either truck again. No plates, no faces, just shapes, lights, and the sound of the horn chasing me through the dark and the storm. It started raining before I even got to the house. That steady, soaking kind of rain. Not a storm, not dramatic, just enough to flatten your hair and blur the edges of everything. I remember standing under the porch light, knocking twice, and wondering if the kid's mom was going to be one of those talkative types, or the kind who just handed you a list and left. It was my first time sitting for them. The house was large. Older, 2 stories with a wide front staircase and deep echoing rooms. When the mother opened the door, she looked distracted. Coat half on, purse strap twisted. She just motioned me in and said her son Benji was in the den. Then she scribbled her number on the back of a receipt and added, "Just until 9. Easy, help yourself to snacks." I found Benji in front of the TV, quietly lining up his toy dinosaurs on the coffee table. He was maybe 6 or 7, polite, but with that blank seriousness some kids have. He didn't say much at first, just asked if I wanted to see his trains. "Downstairs," he said, already walking toward the basement door. "The good ones are down there." I followed him, the old wooden steps creaking with every step. The basement was finished, but barely cool cement floors, wood paneling, dim can lighting with one switch that lit the far end but left the rest shadowed. And there, laid out on a low platform, was a massive train set. Real model trains, the good kind. Little houses, painted trees, plastic roads. The tracks wound in a figure 8, and he flicked a switch on the side to make one of the engines start to hum. He didn't play with it like a kid. He watched it move, slow and methodical, as if he was waiting for it to do something else. Then a sound broke in, shrill and mechanical like a smoke alarm but lower pitched. It echoed weirdly in the basement, bouncing off the concrete. Benji's head snapped around. "Shine!" The sound stopped as quickly as it started. He ran across the room to a closed door I hadn't noticed at first. Flat, painted the same as the wall. He pressed his ear to it, then turned back to me and said, almost in a whisper, "Gotta be quiet. My dad is sleeping." I froze a little. There'd been no mention of a dad. He stood there for a second longer, like he was waiting to hear something. Then he walked back to the train set and started rearranging the tracks. I didn't ask anything, just stood there, watching that little engine go in loops, the rain ticking against the basement window. Eventually, we went back upstairs. I made him mac and cheese and we watched cartoons until he fell asleep on the couch. It was close to 9 when I heard the garage door rumble open. His mom came in damp and flustered, shaking rain off her umbrella. She thanked me, handed me a folded bill without checking it, and bent to scoop Benji up off the couch. I hesitated. Then I asked, trying to sound casual if I'd been too loud earlier. I mentioned the beeping sound and that Benji had said we needed to be quiet because his dad was sleeping downstairs. She stopped mid-reach, just froze. Then she looked at me with this sort of half-smile, as if I'd made a joke she didn't get. "My husband?" she said slowly. "I'm not married." I waited for the correction, the follow-up, divorced, maybe, or something else. But she just said, "It's just me." And then she turned off the TV, picked Benji up, and walked down the hall with him in her arms. I stepped outside into the rain. The porch light was buzzing faintly. I walked to my car, trying not to look back at the basement window, which was still lit from inside, just one dim yellow square in the dark side of the house. It had been raining for 3 days straight when I moved into the new place. The third floor of a brick building with warped railings and a stairwell that always smelled faintly of mildew. I didn't care. I'd gotten the keys cheap because the last tenant broke their lease suddenly, and I needed out of my old situation fast. That kind of rain, it gets into your bones, makes everything seem heavier than it is. The week after I moved in, I came down with a vicious cold, fever, chills, full body ache. I drove back to my parents' place 2 towns over to rest. It was supposed to be just for the weekend. I ended up staying almost 10 days. The rain didn't let up the whole time. It slashed against the windows at night like it wanted in. My mom joked that the sky was trying to drown the world. When I got back to the apartment, something felt off before I even reached the door. The porch light above my unit was out. Not burned out, just off. In that wrong way, like it had been deliberately shut down. Everything else in the hallway worked fine. I unlocked the door and stepped inside with a bag of groceries swinging from my elbow. I flipped the light switch. Nothing. Kitchen. Nothing. I stood there dripping from the rain, surrounded by silence. No buzzing fridge, no hum of the ceiling fan, but my phone was still charging in my pocket. Power wasn't out. I walked through the apartment, flicking every switch. None of the lights came on. I set the groceries down and called maintenance. They sent someone within the hour, an older guy named Pete. He was quiet, polite, asked me to wait outside while he looked around. After about 15 minutes, he stepped back into the hallway, holding one of my light bulbs between his fingers. "I think you should see this," he said. He said, every single bulb in my apartment had been unscrewed just enough to break contact. Not removed, not broken, just loosened, one by one, carefully, deliberately. Pete's face didn't change much, but his voice got flat. He told me to keep the door locked and said he'd put in a report with the office. He didn't say the word break-in, but I could feel it hanging there. That night, I barely slept. Not because of the bulbs, because of the boxes. The ones I hadn't unpacked yet. I hadn't even remembered until then. The diaries. I'd kept personal journals since high school. Stack after stack of lined notebooks filled with my handwriting. Some of them were packed in a suitcase, others in a taped-up liquor box from the grocery store. I'd wedged them behind the sofa in a corner, meaning to sort them later. They were gone. Nothing else had been touched. The TV, the laptop, the kitchen drawer with the emergency cash, everything still there. Just the journals, every single one, taken out of separate boxes, neatly. I sat on the floor in the dark, feeling rain hammer the windows like fists. Over the next few weeks, I changed the locks, bought a new deadbolt, slept with the lights on once they worked again. Rain kept coming in fits and bursts, the kind that soaks your shoulders before you've even locked your car, the kind that fills your ears and makes every sound in the hallway seem like it's coming from inside the walls. Nothing else happened for a while, no signs of forced entry, no more missing items, but I started noticing smaller things. The smell of my shampoo when I hadn't used it that day, a dish in the sink that I didn't remember leaving. One morning I opened the fridge and found all the labels on the jars turned perfectly forward. I don't know why that detail hit me so hard. Maybe because it was so stupid, so specific. That was the last straw. I installed a motion camera in the entryway and a second bolt on the back window. I stopped staying out late. I stopped telling people where I lived. Sometimes I wonder if whoever it was even wanted the diaries for what was written in them, or just to prove they could take them without being caught, to reach in and pull out the most private parts of a person, then leave everything else untouched. I still haven't gotten them back. And it still rains. Sometimes in that same insistent way. Hard enough that you can't hear your own breath in the hallway. It had been raining since sunset. One of those slow, relentless drizzles that soaked into everything and made the night feel heavier. My mom always said she hated nights like that, not because of the weather, but because they made the house feel too quiet. I was 10 years old, curled up on the living room floor with a blanket and a comic book, while my two younger sisters slept in the room we all shared. Mom had the TV on low, flipping between channels without really watching anything. We lived in a small, single-story house on the edge of a rough neighborhood. There weren't many neighbors we trusted, and the ones we did were all working late shifts or had their own problems to worry about. That night, it was just us. Mom and her 3 kids alone in the house with the rain tapping at the windows. It was just after midnight when the first knock came. Mom looked up from the couch, remote still in her hand. I remember the way her head tilted slightly, like she thought she'd imagined it. The knock came again. Sharp, deliberate, not rushed, not frantic. Just 3 hard thuds against the front door. She stood up fast, and I followed her with my eyes. The blanket suddenly too warm. My comic book forgotten. She moved to the door but didn't open it. She just stood there, listening. Then she asked, loud and clear, "Who is it?" No answer. She waited. 10 seconds passed, maybe more. She unlocked the deadbolt, but didn't open the door all the way, just enough to peek out through the gap. The chain still latched. Rain fell in sheets beyond the porch light's reach, making the darkness seem even thicker. There was no one there. She closed it, locked everything again, and turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Probably just a kid messing around," she said. 5 minutes later, the knock came again. This time harder. 3 knocks again, slower, measured. Mom didn't go to the door right away. She walked to the hallway instead, opened the closet, and took out the shotgun. It had been my dad's before he left, and I'd only ever seen her hold it once before. She checked the chamber with practiced hands, then stood just behind the door and shouted that she was armed and would call the police. No response, just the sound of rain and wind. She picked up the phone and dialed. I stayed in the living room, frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. I remember watching the curtains, expecting a face to suddenly appear in the window. Nothing did. When the police arrived, they checked the porch first. One of the officers called my mom over, then bent down and held something up under the porch light. It looked like a long metal snake, glinting with rust and sharp points. Barbed wire. 4 feet of it, twisted and looped, like someone had planned to use it as a whip, or worse. The officer said it looked like it had been tucked beside the door, ready to grab if someone opened it. He didn't say much else, just told Mom to keep the doors locked and the lights on. They walked the perimeter of the house, and said they'd keep a car nearby for the rest of the night. She didn't sleep. I know because I didn't either. The next morning, after the rain had finally stopped, 2 officers came back to check again. One of them noticed muddy footprints near the side of the house, prints that led to the window of the bedroom I shared with my sisters. The glass was smudged, and the officer pointed out small uneven cuts along the window sill, right where the lock was. Someone had tried to pry it open. Mom didn't say much, just nodded, arms folded, her jaw clenched so tight it looked like it hurt. I still remember how she boarded up that window herself, later that day, using old plywood from the shed. She didn't wait for a handyman. She hammered the boards in while I stood by holding a flashlight, even though it was daytime. Every loud bang echoed in my chest. We never found out who it was. No arrests, no follow-ups, just a few muddy footprints and a piece of wire someone left behind in the rain. It was a warm summer night, the kind where the rain doesn't cool the air so much as soak it in something heavier. I was parked near the edge of town with my partner Jules when the call came through. 911 hang-up. Nothing unusual there, except the address listed didn't show up on our system. We double-checked the cross streets, tried running coordinates, nothing. Then dispatch patched in a local resident who'd flagged it. The voice on the line, an older man, maybe 60s, told us the house was real old, halfway rotted into the trees, and hadn't had power in at least a decade. Said it wasn't even on a road anymore, just a trailhead past a chain-link fence about a mile into the woods. By then, the rain had turned steady, loud enough that I had to lean in to hear Jules say, "We're seriously walking out there for a hang-up," but we both knew the answer already. We met up with 2 other units and parked on the shoulder by the fence. The path was soft, muddy underfoot, and none of us spoke much as we moved single file down the trail. Just the sound of boots sucking in and out of the mud, and the rain dripping through the canopy. The house looked like something out of a horror movie. No exaggeration, 2 stories, but the top one sagged so hard on the frame it looked like it was curling in on itself. Windows were smashed or missing. Porch half collapsed. Smelled like mold and animal piss from 30 feet away. We cleared it room by room. No furniture, just broken boards, animal droppings, rusted nails. The upstairs floor groaned like it wanted to come down with us on it. I remember shining my flashlight into a back bedroom and seeing the wallpaper peeling down like skin off a burn. Jules slipped on something wet, might have been moss or just rotten wood, and nearly put her hand through the floor. We radioed in. Nothing found. No signs of recent activity. We were making our way back toward the trail when dispatch chimed in again. Another 911 hang-up. Same ghost address. But this time when they called back, someone answered. Dispatch said it was a child's voice. No words, just little giggles, like a kid pretending to be on the phone. They'd tried tracing it again, and again it pointed to that ruin we just left. We turned back. I remember standing there in the rain with my boot on the first step of that rotten porch, thinking about how the second floor might actually fall this time. But we went in again, searched it slower, called out. Nothing but the sound of rain and something skittering inside the walls. Eventually we cleared it again. The other two officers looked about as unsettled as I felt. We didn't linger. When we got back to the cars, the rain was letting up and the sky was starting to pale at the edges. The calls stopped after that. 6 months later, it was January, deep snow year. I was riding solo on a night shift when the same address came up on my MDT. My stomach dropped. Different call code this time. Welfare check. I drove out anyway. Trail was iced over. Took me 20 minutes to reach the site even with snow boots. The house hadn't changed. If anything, it looked worse. Wind had knocked half the porch down. Inside was dark, quiet. No footprints in the snow. No drag marks. No wildlife. I stood in the doorway with the wind cutting past my ears, just listening. No voices. No giggling. I marked it cleared and walked back. There haven't been any more calls from that address, but the number's still active in dispatch history. Still logs as coming from that empty patch of woods. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 weeks, ever since the hurricane clipped our side of the coast. It was like the clouds had unpacked their bags and settled in. Every corner of the neighborhood dripped. Gutters sagged with weight, lawns turned to mud, and even the metal gate at the end of our block groaned when it opened, swollen with rust. My house had made it through with minimal damage, a few shingles missing, and one downed tree, but everything smelled like mildew now. That's why I'd left the windows open in my daughter's room. Just a crack. Just enough to breathe. She was staying at my sister's place inland, far from the flooding. I'd told myself it was safer there until the roads dried out. Her bedroom was stuffy without her, the little plastic stars on the ceiling blinking dully in the lamplight. I use the baby monitor sometimes just for comfort. It was left over from when she was a toddler, one of those old models with a clunky black and white screen and grainy audio. It didn't have internet. That felt safer too. One night, just after 2 in the morning, I was half asleep on the couch when I heard it click on. White noise, then a voice. It wasn't my daughter's. A woman's voice, light and sing-songy, drifting through static. Ellie? Ellie, come to the window. I froze. Rain hissed against the living room windows. I stared at the monitor on the coffee table, the dim gray image of an empty bed. No movement. The voice repeated, slower this time, like a lullaby. I walked to her room in socks, not even thinking to be quiet. Her bed was empty. The window was open wider than I'd left it, just a few inches, but it was enough to let in the smell of wet earth and something. I slammed it shut, locked it. Then I sat in her room until dawn, with the lights on. The next day, I told myself I was overtired. Stress and the storm had messed with my sleep. But something about the voice nagged at me. I kept hearing it, even in the shower, in the hum of the fridge. That tone, that awful sweetness. I didn't tell anyone until a few nights later, when I was on the phone with my neighbor, Linda. We'd been trading stories about fallen fences and soggy mail. When I mentioned the voice offhand like a joke, there was a pause. Then she said, "Wait, your little girl used to talk about that, didn't she? The singing lady?" My stomach dropped. I'd forgotten about that. Ellie used to wake up crying, saying there was a woman outside her window who sang to her. I'd chalked it up to dreams. I even slept in her room once, to prove it was nothing. That was before the storm, before we opened the house back up. Linda's voice dropped. "You know who that is, right?" I didn't. She told me about a man who worked for the neighborhood maintenance crew. Mid-40s, quiet. She'd seen him in the alley behind my yard more than once, even before the storm. Said he was always checking the fences, always at night. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next morning, I walked the perimeter, found muddy footprints under Ellie's window. barely noticeable in the grass, but they were there. I took pictures, called the HOA, and they gave me his name. I asked if he'd been scheduled to work on our street that week. He hadn't. I waited for him the following night. The rain came down harder than ever, slicing sideways across the yard. I kept the monitor on. Nothing but static. Around 2:30 a.m., I saw movement outside through the blinds. Just a flicker, a silhouette crossing the side of the house. I called Linda, told her to come over, bring someone. She showed up with her brother, a retired cop. By then I'd heard the voice again, clear as day on the monitor. "Ellie, don't hide. Come say hello." The bed was empty. The window was open again. I swear I'd locked it. We caught him crouched beneath the window, half shielded by a bush, soaked to the bone. He didn't run when Linda's brother shined a flashlight on him, just stood up slowly and mumbled something about checking for flood damage. At 2 a.m, in the rain, with no tools. He didn't have a crew badge, nothing in his truck either, just fast food wrappers and a pair of binoculars in the passenger seat. Police took him that night. I paid to have metal bars installed on all the windows the next day. Ugly things, thick and white and rust-proof. The rain's let up a little now, but I still can't stand the sound of water on the glass. Ellie's coming home this weekend. I haven't told her what happened, just that the house is safer now. Still, I leave the monitor on every night, just in case. And sometimes, when the wind hits just right, I still hear it. It started as a joke between me and my friend Tyler. We'd been talking about spooky places around town, and the cemetery on the hill came up. It wasn't the oldest graveyard, not the prettiest either, just rows of tilted headstones and an iron gate that always seemed rusted shut, even when it was technically open. That night the rain was light but steady, soaking our hoodies and turning the gravel paths to soft mud. We didn't mind. We were just killing time, trying to scare each other. We wandered between headstones, shining our phone lights on the names. Most of them were worn down to soft shadows, unreadable. The rain slicked everything in gray and silver. Tyler tossed a pebble into a nearby puddle and grinned at me like we were 10 years old again, daring each other to go deeper into the rows. But then I saw something that made my stomach knot. Up near the tray line at the far end of the cemetery, beyond the last row of graves, a faint orange glow flickered. At first I thought it was just a reflection, light bouncing off wet marble or a house in the distance. But it pulsed. A fire. A small bonfire, just far enough away to be out of place. Tyler saw it too. He nudged me and whispered, "Let's check it out." I didn't say anything, just followed him, water sloshing in my shoes with every step. As we got closer, I could make out the shape of it. A fire burning low but steady, its smoke curling upward into the branches. The air shifted. The smell hit me next. Not wood, not smoke. Something thick and sour, like meat left too long in the sun. My chest tightened. Then someone moved. A figure stepped near the edge of the firelight. Tall, still, just standing there. No umbrella, no jacket. The rain poured around them, but they didn't move. Tyler stopped cold. My hand went to his shoulder instinctively, pulling him back. We didn't speak. We just turned around and started walking fast. Not running that would draw attention, but I felt every step like thunder in my bones. The smell clung to the air as we moved downhill, growing fainter only when we crossed the gravel path and hit the road again. Our clothes were soaked. My heart wouldn't slow down. We didn't talk much after that. Tyler cracked a few jokes to lighten the mood, but I could tell he was shaken too. I went home, dried off, and tried to pretend it didn't get to me. The next morning, I was sitting in the kitchen when my uncle came in, reading something on his phone. He looked up and said almost offhandedly that the police had found a body in the cemetery burned. They said someone had been reported missing earlier in the week, kidnapped. The body was found by a groundskeeper that morning, in a pit where someone had built a fire. I didn't ask for more details. I just nodded and kept chewing my cereal like nothing inside me had frozen. I thought about that figure, the smell, the way they just stood there while the fire burned. I told myself I should go back. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe we were never that close. But I knew we were. I remembered the feel of the heat even through the rain. I remembered how quiet it was except for the fire crackling and the rain falling. I walked to the edge of the cemetery later that week. Once the police tape was gone, I didn't go in. The air still carried that faint, sick smell whenever the wind shifted. I stood there for a long time, just listening to the rain on my hood, and then I turned around and went home. The dogs were restless that night, not barking, just pacing, a subtle tension in their movements that made me pause the movie and listen. Rain tapped the windows with soft insistence, the only sound in the house besides their nails on the hardwood floors. I was 2 days into a week-long dog-sitting job for a family friend. Big house, middle of nowhere, and a storm rolling in. I'd checked the locks before bed, but I found myself double-checking them again anyway. The rain had started about an hour earlier, a soft hiss over the fields beyond the back patio. No nearby neighbors, just dark woods and gravel driveways curling into distance. I liked the isolation during the day. It felt peaceful. At 2 a.m. it felt like a trap. When the knock came, I wasn't near the front door. I only knew someone was there because one of the dogs, a shepherd mix, let out a low growl and fixed his gaze on the foyer. I crept to the corner of the hallway and peeked around. A woman was standing outside the glass, soaked through, barefoot. In one hand she held a flashlight, shaking slightly. In the other, what looked like pliers. I didn't move, I didn't say anything. I just watched. She pressed her face close to the glass and cupped her hand to see inside. Then she spoke, not yelling but loud enough to cut through the storm. "Open the door. I know what you're doing in there." I stayed still. Her eyes were wild, darting, glassy. She looked older than me, maybe mid-40s, hair plastered to her skull from the rain. She started tapping the pliers on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. The shepherd began barking now, the other dog joining in. I backed up, heart pounding. Then she smashed the window. The pliers came down with a sudden, terrible force, and the glass spider webbed instantly. I turned and ran, grabbing both leashes from the hook and fumbling to clip them onto the dogs, as the sound of shattering filled the hallway behind me. She was inside. I heard her boots, or maybe her bare feet, on the tile. Heard her muttering something I couldn't make out. I yanked the dogs toward the guest bathroom, the only room with a lock strong enough to make me feel like it might hold. I slammed the door, locked it, and crouched by the toilet, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. The dispatcher's voice was calm, practiced. I gave the address, whispering as the dogs growled low in their throats. The woman was moving through the house, opening doors, calling out names. She didn't call mine. She kept saying, "Come on out, sweetie, it's okay. Mommy's here. You don't have to be scared." The dogs pressed against me as the woman's voice got closer. Then she tried the bathroom door. Click. Silence. Then she began turning the handle, slow at first, then harder. The door thudded in its frame. She didn't scream. She just kept repeating the same thing. "Open up, baby. It's okay now, I'm here." It was the calmness that chilled me. While I stayed huddled, the dispatcher told me help was on the way. I could hear the rain again now, hammering the roof. Time stretched, every second felt like it might be the one when the door gave out. And then, the homeowner called. I saw her name light up my screen and I answered, whispering as I explained what was happening. Her voice was tight with fear. She told me the woman. Her neighbor had a history. She'd lost her daughter years ago. Sometimes on bad nights she'd confuse people, think she saw her daughter again. Sometimes she got aggressive. The homeowner had just received a call from the same woman saying there was a robber in her house, that she'd seen him and was handling it. We both knew she meant me. The banging stopped. I couldn't tell if that was better or worse. The dispatcher told me the deputies were minutes away. I waited, not daring to move, listening for any shift in sound. Then the dogs barked again. The front door opened. Voices, flashlights, commands shouted. The bathroom door never opened. She never got through. The police found her in the hallway, still clutching the pliers, soaked to the bone, whispering to herself. They took her away. When I finally stepped outside, the rain was still falling, but the storm had passed. The lights of the cruiser reflected off the wet gravel like fractured glass. One of the deputies nodded at me as he helped secure the house. I didn't say much. I just stood there, hands still trembling, leash wrapped tight around my wrist. The dogs pressed close to my legs like they were afraid she might come back out of the shadows. It was supposed to be a simple morning estimate. My partner had gotten a call from an elderly woman who needed help fixing a porch railing. She'd said she lived alone and couldn't get up and down her steps anymore. I was between cleaning jobs that day, so I rode along. The neighborhood was older, quiet, with yards that looked like no one had mowed since last summer. The clouds were thick but not moving, and the air smelled like wet earth, even though it hadn't started raining yet. When we pulled up, the house looked like it had once been pale yellow, but had faded to the color of dishwater. The front porch sagged toward the street. A narrow path cut through weeds up to the steps. The front door was open, just the screen shut, and we could hear a television blaring inside. The old woman appeared when we knocked. She was small, wiry, with a gray braid and eyes that kept jumping from me to him. At first, she seemed put out that I was there, but her expression changed when she learned I was his girlfriend. She smiled and said, "Oh good, I like when couples work together, honest people." Something in her voice was off, sweet and strange, like the syrup that's gone a little sour. She waved us inside. The smell hit first, mildew, cigarettes, and something damp underneath it all. The living room was dim, curtains half drawn. There were stacks of newspapers and old plastic tubs, and somewhere deeper in the house a steady dripping sound, like water hitting a metal pan. She said the railing wood was in the back, and started leading us through. We followed her down a narrow hallway lined with old family photos. Every one of them was dusty, the glass cloudy. The house had that shotgun layout, a straight line from the front to the back, with rooms peeling off to the sides. The deeper we went, the darker it got. I thought maybe the lights didn't work, or maybe she liked it that way. When we stepped into the kitchen, 2 men were sitting there in their underwear at the table. Both were pale and heavy-set, skin shiny like they'd just woken from a fever. One had a bruise under his eye. The other was eating from a jar with his fingers. Neither spoke. The woman said these were her sons. Just visiting, she claimed, and she'd forgotten to mention them on the phone. My partner tried to act normal, asked where the materials were. She frowned and said she didn't know what he was talking about. Her voice sharpened, her smile gone. He looked at me then, the smallest tilt of his head that meant let's go. But when we turned toward the hallway, the son stood up. They moved without saying anything and blocked both doorways. One toward the hall, one toward the back porch. The room felt suddenly smaller. I could hear the rain starting on the roof, soft but steady. The smell of wet dust came through the open window. One of them made a gesture, obscene, deliberate. I stepped back into my partner's arm. The old woman's face twisted, her voice rising, saying something about people lying, taking advantage. My heart was pounding so hard it made my vision shake. Then my partner did something I still can't explain. He stepped forward and shouted a loud nonsense string of words. Not even a sentence, something like a battle cry. It was so sudden and wild that everyone froze, even me. The old woman flinched. Her son stopped moving. That was our window. He grabbed my hand, shoved the screen door open with his shoulder, and we ran. The rain had turned heavy, thick drops bouncing off the porch and hitting our faces. We didn't stop until we were back in the truck, doors locked, breath shaking. Through the windshield, the house looked smaller, slanted, like it was trying to sink into the ground. He started the engine. Neither of us said a word. The rain kept falling harder, drowning out everything else until it sounded almost like applause. We drove away, watching the house disappear in the mirror, still half open, still waiting for someone else to stop by. It had rained earlier that day. Not a downpour, but enough to leave the world damp and glistening. By the time my roommate Jesse and I left campus, the clouds had broken apart into scattered charcoal streaks, and the light was turning gold behind the treetops. We were both worn out, finals looming, nerves fried, and Jesse had the idea to take a drive out to the state forest, somewhere quiet. He said he knew a spot, a clearing a few miles past the old ranger station where nobody ever went. We parked off a narrow service road, tires crunching over gravel slick with wet leaves. The woods were quiet in that way that feels deeper than silence, the kind where even your breath seems too loud. We stayed in the car at first, windows cracked, letting the smell of moss and damp pine fill the cabin. It should have felt peaceful, and for a while it did. Then the first set of headlights appeared behind us. A dark SUV. It pulled in without hesitation, like it knew exactly where it was going. Jesse leaned forward, watching. Before we could say anything, another car followed. A sedan this time. Both vehicles stopped near the tray line. 4 men stepped out between them, moving with that kind of military coordination you don't forget once you see it. 2 had handguns already out, casually hanging by their sides. 1 carried a long object wrapped in thick plastic, dragging it like it was heavy. The other men were pulling something else from the trunk of the sedan, shorter, bulkier. Neither object moved on its own. Jesse whispered something I didn't catch. I couldn't stop staring. The man with the plastic-wrapped bundle doused it in something from a metal canister, then lit it with a long lighter. It went up fast. There was a shape to it under the plastic limbs maybe, or at least something human length, but the fire blurred the details. The second object didn't get burned immediately. One of the men stood a few feet away, aimed his handgun, and fired 3 shots into it. The noise cracked through the clearing, louder than it should have been in all that empty space. Then the canister again. Another flash of flame. That's when one of them looked our way. We hadn't moved. I don't think we'd even breathed, but the headlights must have glinted off our windshield just right. Or maybe he heard something. Either way, his head snapped around, eyes catching ours through the trees. He raised his arm and pointed, not with the gun but like a warning. Another man started walking into the woods toward us, slow, methodical steps. The others followed, spaced out like they were sweeping the area. Jesse turned the key. The engine coughed once, then caught. I saw one of the men freeze, then start running. We peeled out so fast the wheels spat mud against the trunk of a pine. I don't remember what Jesse yelled, but I remember the taillights in the rear view, theirs growing brighter as they gave chase. The service road was narrow and slick. We skidded around a bend, nearly sideswiped a stump, and powered through puddles that sprayed against the windows like sheets of broken glass. Behind us I heard another engine, revving harder now. They were gaining. There was a break in the trees. Jesse took it without slowing, and we hit the main road with a bounce that slammed my head against the ceiling. Then we were flying past mile markers and trail signs, and ranger posts, none of it slowing us down. Eventually, the headlights behind us disappeared. Whether they turned back or lost us, I don't know. We didn't stop until we were back on campus, parked crooked outside the safety office with the engine still running. We told them everything. They took notes, asked questions, promised to send someone out. Nothing was found. No tire tracks, no fire damage, no casings, nothing. But the burn smell stayed in the car for days. I had to throw